Alright, so looking at healers in pre-patch part 2, which is going to be Resto Shaman, Resto Druid, Mistweaver. Not really going to be talking about or covering raid setups at all, just looking at Mythic Plus and PvP. And when I say PvP, I mean competitive, so arena, solo queue. And we'll start with Resto Shaman, probably the weakest of the three I have left to cover. As far as Mythic Plus goes, Resto Shaman to me feels really good from a gameplay perspective. Riptide is still your bread and butter, but things like being able to have double Earth Shield, along with Water Shield to make yourself a little bit more tanky or easier to heal, along with the buffed Earth Shield talents, means your spot healing when you need it to be can be really quite strong, like debuffed target healing. If you just swap your Earth Shield around and use your Riptide, and if you need to Healing Surge, you can get a lot of healing done that way. So from a gameplay perspective, I'm quite happy with Resto Shaman. Like I said, Riptide is still its bread and butter, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting, and a big part of what makes the spec feel good and fun and good reactive healing. But there's also what feels like at the moment a lot more buttons to press. Well, I say a lot, it's only a couple more buttons, but it's double the amount of buttons most Resto Shamans used to press through all of Shadowlands at least. So it makes the spec feel a lot more dynamic to me, and that is that Healing Rain with Acid Rain is now worth pressing a lot of the time because it does damage. It also procs your Deluge and does pretty decent healing. And then the buff to Tidal Waves to make it affect Chain Heal has been a huge part of the spec for me. I'm a big Chain Heal enjoyer. It's one of my favorite heals in the game to press. So having that become a viable core part of Resto Shaman gameplay, even in small scale content, feels great to me. Resto Shaman also, it has so much utility on the class tree that I can tailor make what utility I need for specific dungeons. It also feels like it has great cooldown healing at the moment. Spirit Link is as good as it's always been, but now you also get Ascendance without really giving up anything else to get it, which feels great if you need it. And even something like a Unleashed Lifed Chain Heal when you know big incoming damage is coming out for the party, especially with the Deluge buff. So the throughput side of Resto Shaman is really quite good. Its stacked throughput is obviously better than its spread throughput. I don't really see that being an issue at the moment because there doesn't seem like there's a great deal of spread throughput requirements, at least in the first season of Dragonflight Mythic Plus. The weakest part of the spec, at least for me at the moment, is definitely the damage component. Losing Vesper is a little rough. Resto Shamans can no longer do a solid amount of damage by pressing one button every 30 seconds. So if you want to do reasonable damage as a Resto Shaman, you really are going to have to spend a lot of globals on Chain Lightning and things. Now with Riptide being as strong as it is, I felt like I had a lot of free globals to spend, so that hasn't really been a huge issue for me, but I would have put probably Resto Shaman and Discipline Priest as the lowest damage healers in pre-patch and in beta. And after the recent announcement yesterday of the disc buffs, I guess that category is now only Resto Shamans that do less damage than everyone else. With a 30% buff to discipline damage is pretty hefty. I don't think Resto Shaman damage will be terrible, but I also don't think it's going to be at the same kind of level as Preservation Evokers, Holy Paladins, Mistweavers, Resto Druid, literally everybody else right now that does a lot of damage. As far as PvP goes, Resto Shaman feels like a somewhat difficult healer to play, but the viability is definitely there. Riptide, Earth Shield, and Healing Stream Totem, with their talent that buffs its healing for each tick, is going to be the lion's share of your healing in PvP. But the added benefit of being able to take a lot of utility at the same time, like Earth Grab Totem and Knockback and Stormkeeper and Lasso, it means that if you can juggle switching between a kind of defensive and offensive playstyle at the right times, Resto Shaman can be a huge playmaker. The buffs to Ghost Wolf are also really, really good. Being able to purge and drop totems and things while running as a Ghost Wolf is excellent. And the MVP of Shaman PvP for me has been Knockback while stunned, which is just a huge... It's a feels good button when you get kidneyed and you're worried about if you're going to live. Thunderstorm goes a long way to helping that out. And the other one is Unleash Shield, the PvP talent. Now there are a couple of ways to use this. The major buff here in pre-patch has been that you can now have 2 shields on yourself and you get both of the effects that Unleash Shield would give. You can put Earth Shield and Lightning Shield on yourself, and when some pesky melee runs at you, you can use Unleash Shield on them and you can knock them back and root them in place at the same time. It procs the knockback and then it roots them where they've been knocked back to. At the moment, at least, that is also a route that doesn't share DRs with any other route, which makes it a little bit busted. I imagine that will get changed at some point. But for now, Resto Shaman is the king of not letting melees touch you, which feels really good. And now they have an answer for being stunned. Same thing with proccing Nature's Guardian and things, means that for the most part, queuing into melee cleaves on Resto Shaman is definitely the best it's kind of ever been as a shaman. We went through however many years of Train the Blue, and Resto Shaman's used to getting absolutely steamrolled by melee cleaves. Well, if you play your kind of toolkit reasonably well, you can do a good job of just not letting melee have good uptime on you, not letting them kill you, which is great. Next up, we'll go to Resto Druid. Not a whole lot to say for Resto Druid. If you enjoy the hot kind of playstyle and you like cat weaving or owl weaving or whatever kind of druid switching form playstyle you like, Druid's just in a great place at the moment, Resto Druid. Its throughput is exceedingly high. I think I said in the other video that Resto Druid and Holy Priest probably have the highest throughput of any healer in Mythic Plus at the moment. Resto Druid also does really good damage if you're quite comfortable with weaving, cat weaving or owl weaving, especially in good coordinated groups that aren't going to take much damage, that allow you to really leverage as much time as possible dealing damage. Druid utility is, as always, amazing. Same with their defensives, especially with the buffs you can get to bear form on the class tree. Whenever I play my other healers and I'm doing content where I know big single hits are coming in, I'm always envious of my Druid being able to just sit in bear form and know that really nothing's going to kill me. I'm not sure what Resto Druid weakness is supposed to be. So to be fair, I don't know if we're still kind of playing the game where every spec is supposed to have some kind of weakness. At the moment, you've got some healers that are a little weak at spread healing or a little weak at burst healing or have mana weaknesses and things like that. And then you've got Resto Druid that just has no issues really at all. They have excellent single target throughput, excellent AoE throughput, excellent stacked throughput, spread throughput, good utility, good defensives, good damage, good mana longevity. And they definitely have a spec talent tree that is exceptional. You can build around the playstyles and aspects of Resto Druid that you enjoy, and honestly all of them feel quite good. Invigorate feels good, Verdancy feels good, the Rejuve buffs feel good, even playing Germination at the moment actually also feels quite good. As far as PvP goes, it's pretty much the same story. Resto Druid has probably the highest skill cap of any healer in PvP. The only real downside there would have been for Resto Druid is that they lost their Rake Stun and some of their offensive pressure. Some of the utility, I guess you would say, that Resto Druids have always historically had, or at least since Legion, have been put on choice nodes, so they've lost some of it. Things like having to choose between Mighty Bash or Disorienting Roar, having to choose between Mass Roots or Vortex. And for a while there, it looked like Resto Druids were going to have to play less aggressively than they can do, and instead kind of sit back and boringly just hot up their entire team and sit in bear form the whole time. Now with Rake Stun specifically coming back, it looks like that isn't really the case anymore. Resto Druids can play aggressively, they can play defensively. They really have it all. The only limiting factor any player is really going to have on a Resto Druid is their own skill cap. How well they can kind of combine the toolkit and play, and how well they can prepare for incoming damage and pre-bear goes and things like that. I'd also say that for solo queue especially, it is effectively a game mode which is nothing more than healer versus healer at the end of the day. If you assume that all DPS are going to play roughly the same from game to game, regardless of what team they're on, and the kind of differences in the DPS is going to even out over time, then the only thing that really matters when you go into solo queue is, does healer A outplay healer B for the most part? And Resto Druid is definitely one of those healers that can allow you to do that. I would say the other healer that can, surprisingly, is Mistweaver, and that is simply because of mana, especially with the 40% health buff coming in Dragonflight. If nothing else gets adjusted, I mean, I imagine it will. Blizzard said they are looking at maybe adjusting the PvP set bonuses and things like that, the trinket bonus. But the bottom line is that when it comes down to healer versus healer, in a game mode where you can't drink, well, your mana longevity is going to come into it eventually, especially if the meta turns into more dampening games. Then Mistweaver has an excellent opportunity to simply out-mana every other healer every game. Resto Druid has the same kind of opportunity in that they can play aggressively and set up wins or win conditions for their team with good crowd control and cooldown trading and things like that. And the other healer that can do that is both of the priest healers, just because mind games can be so exceptionally strong if used at the right time. The third healer to talk about is Mistweaver. Now, I know this is definitely, at least at the moment, looks like one of those healers that's a bit of a crowd favorite, and rightfully so. Mistweavers have gone without a lot for so long that now that they are getting some attention from Blizzard and some real improvements to their gameplay and tree, the hype factor is high, which is great to see. As far as Mistweaver goes in Mythic Plus, I would say, look, their damage is exceptional at the moment. It's quite high, especially pack damage. Their single target damage is terrible, but the amount of damage they can do from pack to pack, especially in big pools, is very high. Their throughput is also very high. My Mistweaver has some terrible gear, and I was healing some meme keys, getting some friends their 15s and gearing up ults and things like that. And I had a couple of situations where I was healing bosses like Morose and Karazhan that went much longer than it should have. And on I believe a 275, very undergeared, poorly played Mistweaver, I could still maintain 20k HPS quite a while. So throughput is very high in pre-patch. It's also quite high in beta. The real limiting factor, which is effectively the story of Mistweaver for the past few years, is their mana longevity. Now, at the moment in pre-patch, this hasn't been a huge issue because for the most part, bosses don't live long enough, and we have a Mythic Plus mechanic that returns mana often. But with that going away, the story for Mistweavers feels like it's going to revolve around how much efficient healing they can get out of fist weaving, because their ability to heal with like raw casted throughput is going to be limited, or they're going to be drinking often, one or the other. The very good Mistweavers in very good coordinated groups isn't really going to be an issue for them, mostly because coordinated groups don't take that much damage, so they don't have to heal very much. And the damage they do take is usually scripted, which means you can press something like Yulon's every minute and get a huge portion of that kind of healing throughput out without really spending a lot of mana to do it. Now, in unorganized or disorganized groups, where people stand in the fire every now and then and tanks kind of could need quite a lot of babysitting, I could see Mistweavers struggling more than other healers, and that's purely from mana. So when I say struggle, if you're willing to sit down and grab a couple of ticks of water or drinking between each pull, then you probably won't be struggling, you'll be fine. As far as their utility goes, it's not stellar, but it's not bad. Mystic Touch is useful to almost all groups. Although if Windwalker becomes meta, then there isn't much reason to take a Mistweaver, because basically all of the utility that a Mistweaver brings, a Windwalker brings. Now, I guess this is the same for all other healers as well. But this definitely feels like it's the kind of issue that's plagued Mistweaver more than other healers, just because Windwalker has been meta for so long. I could also see in high keys Mistweavers struggling because they don't bring a true tank external, and they could end up in situations where they have to combine a few of their own defensives to live mechanics that other healers could just press their wall to live through. Apart from mana though, Mistweavers don't have that many weaknesses or issues. Their utility is okay, their throughput is very high, their mana might be an issue in some situations, but they are also very fun to play. As for PvP, I don't know how they're going to necessarily rank up against other healers, but I can say with some certainty that Mistweavers in PvP right now feel much better than they have felt in PvP for years. Since probably pre-Legion, they're in the best state in PvP they have been in for, a long time. Going on a decade, I think, at the moment. And that is because their mana is exceptional. I mean, has been forever. And they now have a couple of more tools to live through their major weakness, which has historically been getting swapped to in a stun or getting kicked and dying in the kick window, the lockout window. The only issue I've found, personally, just because of me playing very poorly on Mistweaver in PvP, is that in solo queue especially, I will often get teams that have no real sense of positioning or playing aggressively or defensively, and they will just run all over the map all the time, right? The kind of melee players that will be wherever their target is no matter what. And quite a few times that has meant that I have gotten into bad positions, which is basically me just being out of range of my port, and I get swapped to in a stun and die, and I have no buttons to press during it. So the only real weakness or caveat I have to playing a Mistweaver in PvP is that you are very squishy. Your defense is to not get hit at all, be as slippery as possible, and in solo queue, having teams that don't really think about positioning makes that difficult for you to do. But other than that, Mistweaver PvP is also really quite good at the moment. Anyone who's watched now both part 1 and part 2 of this because they're trying to get an idea of what healer they want to play and what's going to be meta and what's strong and things like that, the one piece of advice I would like to kind of highlight here is that, in my estimation at least, healers in Dragonflight are the most well balanced that they have been in a very long time, years, maybe a decade, maybe Legion, pre-Legion. There really doesn't seem like a bad choice at the moment. All healers have some strengths. All of them pretty much have a couple of slight weaknesses. I don't think any of them are going to be bad or non-viable in any way for Dragonflight content. So I would say pick a healer that you enjoy playing. Pick the playstyle you like. And don't worry too much about objective power. The difference between the best healer and the worst healer at the moment is very small. And that'll do it for now. So thanks for watching, and algorithm stuff.